Hi, welcome. I'm Hannah. This is Theology Therapist. Thanks for coming. Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about religion and sex messaging. So, sacred texts of all, if not most, major religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, they all have quite mixed messaging about sex that is interpreted through a patriarchal lens. And to boot, it's taught as good or bad, right or wrong. For example, in the Hebrew Bible, there is the book of Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, depends, which is an erotic text about two young lovers. And if you are flipping there right now, you may want to grab a translation or an interpretation because or what all the talk about the fruit is. So, before you get too excited, no pun intended, what happens, what I've seen happen, what I've read, heard happen with this text is that it gets taught as married couples or is metaphorized as one's love for God, which isn't any less weird, let's just say. Why does religion interpret sex this way? It's the patriarchy. You might be thinking, Hannah, we get it. It's old, it's outdated. I've never heard of Song of Songs, who cares? So, I have some thoughts about that. Even if you don't care, even if you've left religion behind and you've moved on, it would benefit you to pause here because sex and religion are interpreted through a cultural lens, and in the US, we don't have a particularly positive relationship with either. Okay, so why this matters is because these are messages that are taught at a really early age. During a time when our bodies are transitioning from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. The message is that sex, aka pleasure, is bad, and if you do it in any way other than the one right way, then you're a bad person too. And so here, we're not going to totally get into this today, but Brady said sex, aka pleasure, and then there's like the one right way. So we want to just make mention here that the one right way isn't necessarily pleasurable for everybody or for everybody involved, all right? And so that itself has implications if you aren't the person that it's pleasurable for, right? And because then that means that what feels good to you in this body that you're in is told to you that makes you bad. Now, your body is changing and you reject the way it functions. Or you're a full-grown adult, you've already had sex, and on some level, you're okay with that. But on a whole other level, you feel ashamed of it. Or the message that you've heard about church or temple or in your religious community doesn't match your lived experience whatsoever. So you may wonder if it's you. If you aren't surrounded by a supportive community, all of that overt messaging may make you wonder if you're the one with the issue, right? If you're the one that's divergent. Because you're the only one that, to your knowledge at this point, has this experience that isn't the right way. So if you don't have that supportive community around you, the messages that you hear about sex in your religious community may only serve to reinforce negative beliefs about yourself, the beliefs that God has about you, and the felt need to hide who you are. Sex messages are super important. They impact our beliefs about ourselves, others, and the whole world. So one way that sex messages impact our beliefs about everything comes from purity culture, but it also, I'm going to take some of the research from one of the professors in my undergrad. His name is Richard Beck. He's a psychologist, and he looks at purity culture and he looks at this shame, right? So he took some of the work of Jonathan Haidt. So I was at one of his lectures years ago, and he was up on stage and he had a pitcher of water. I don't have a glass with me or anything, but he had a pitcher of water and he had students come up on stage, freshmen in college. He had them come up on stage and he asked them if they would drink the water, and everybody would. And then he put a roach in the water. And roaches are like my biggest fear. I'm terrified of them, okay? So you can imagine that at that point, nobody wanted to drink it with this disgusting bug in the water. Then he filters it. He takes a pitcher and he filters the water, right? So there is, for all intents and purposes, there's no roach still in the water. You can see there's no roach in the water. So but then he asks the students up on stage and he says, will you drink this water? And you know what? Nobody wanted to drink it. And the reason why that is so profound is because even though it no longer had the roach in it, even though the water had been filtered, it was seen as tainted. Water had like roach essence in it, and it was seen as no longer drinkable. What does this have to do with sexuality? Well, essentially, the sex messages that are used in fundamentalist or cultish religious communities are that sex is bad, right? Except for, like one way. And that one way, let's just be very clear, that one way is between a man and a woman and predominantly missionary style. So it doesn't leave a lot of room for anatomy. It doesn't leave a lot of room for identity, or it doesn't leave a lot of room for pleasure and human experience, right? Back to the water example. So the water, right? This is really important because it shows how in our minds, the way we look at something like that is that once it has been sort of touched by something that triggers our disgust response, it is like off limits. It is like, no, definitely, it's untouchable, right? Or not drinkable anymore, right? Its very essence has changed because it's no longer drinkable water. It's like then roach water, right? I'm gonna be the first one here to tell you that I'm right there with you, because roaches, remember, they are like my biggest fear, and so there's no way that you could get me to drink that water. I remember growing up and hearing metaphors, because I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, hearing metaphors of sex, sexuality, of value, and being told, right, and let's just be clear, education, abstinence only is the predominant sex education message, I'd say by and large. And hearing metaphors like, why would anybody want to buy a car after they've already driven it off the lot? Which essentially is saying to me, why would anybody want to date you after they have already had sex with you? Oh my gosh, how is that okay? So messages are really important. Sex messages are so extremely important, because what it's saying is, like what that metaphor, what that message is saying is that you are not valuable enough for somebody to date you outside of what they want from your body, what they want to take from your body. So that's why this is so important to think about. Even if you're not part of a religious community anymore, even if you're like, I don't care about all these old texts, it's so important to think about what are the sex messages that I have been fed, because they don't just go away, right? We have to actually actively undo them. If you found this to be helpful, I am so happy to hear it. If you feel like you need extra support, please think about reaching out to a local clergy member or a therapist in your area. I'll see you in the comments. And if you're a Massachusetts resident and you would like to discuss this further, please schedule an initial consult. There's a link in the description. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next week.